I am, as Wendy said, Laura Stockhouse. I teach many of the science-based academic courses here in the Equine Studies department, including nutrition and anatomy and physiology. So we're going to give you a little snippet today of what a course in those types would look like. So everybody on their table should have a couple of handouts. We're going to start with nutrition today. So we're going to start with the one that looks like this. So if you guys can all find that. If anybody needs one, please let us know, because my teaching assistants over here will be happy to bring you more if you need them. But we're going to discuss a little bit about the basics of nutrition, of feeding our horses. And often as an equine professional, one of the first questions that I get when people find out that I teach this class is, how do I know how much my horse should be eating, and how do I know what to feed him? So we start with the first question always, is how do we know if he's getting enough, right? And the chart you have in front of you is the thing that we use to answer that question. All of us, so we is the horse community at large. This is the body condition scoring chart, the Henneke body condition scoring system, okay? And our wonderful representatives at Purina Feed, who take care of us here at the barn, put together this sheet for us so that you guys could have all the information that you needed. But you'll notice that there's a picture of a horse in the middle with some areas on his body circled. So we have to have a way to be able to tell if each type of horse is eating enough. There's quite a difference between what we would feed a pony, for instance, than what we would feed our thoroughbred racehorse. So not all horses are obviously created equal in their nutritional needs. And we use this sort of basic chart to give us an idea of whether or not the horse is getting the amount of calories that he needs. So the body condition scoring chart is specifically about, is he eating enough food for the work that he is doing and for the life that he is living? It doesn't always necessarily tell us about the type of food, which we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes. But first and foremost, you just kind of take a look at this picture and notice the areas that are circled. And they're sort of interesting areas. The first one we look at always, of course, is the very center of the horse's body, which is where his ribs would be, okay? And as you would imagine, that's the first place that we look when we're body condition scoring a horse. Now, body condition scoring is something that you practice to get good at and can be a little bit subjective. So some people see things maybe half a point one direction or the other differently from others. But for the most part, it's a standardization. And it goes from 1 all the way up to 9. So 1 is a horse that is very thin, or a 9 is a horse that is extremely fat, okay? Extremely fat is a thing, that is actually on there. So when we stand back and look at our horses, we're gonna wanna do this in a space where he's not sitting down eating in a corner of his stall with his head down and his behind to us. We're gonna put him in good lighting and stand him up straight and take a really good look at him first, okay? The first place we usually look is the rib cage. And if the horse does not visibly have any ribs showing, we automatically start at a number 5, okay? We start at a number 5. And the reason for that is that horses store their energy very specifically in certain parts across their body, which is how we were able to get to this standardized chart. So we know that if we can't see any of his ribs, all right, he's at sort of a moderate weight. Now, we may work backwards from the 5 or forward from the 5 as we move to the other places on his body to see where he's keeping fat. But if we look right at him and I can't see ribs right away, I'm gonna say, okay, he's at a 5 right now, okay? And then we're gonna move to the rest of the parts of his body. And everybody does this a little differently, but in one way or another, we're gonna look at the crest of his neck, which is the area that goes sort of from the top of his poll all the way to his withers where his mane grows out, okay? We're gonna see if he's got any spongy pads of fat there. If it's really, really, really fat, it may be misshapen in a way that makes it larger on the top than it really should be, okay? Those are horses that are storing a whole bunch of fat in their neck. We look at the wither area, not necessarily on top, and that one's also a little tricky, because if those of you who have high withered horses know, some horses are just made pointy there, right? Some of them come that way, and we have a hard time putting examples on them, right? But we have to check the sides of the wither to see if there's fat deposited on either side. We move down behind their shoulders, we check for that there as well. And then up on top of their loin, so right behind where your saddle would be, we're gonna check there as well. And back at the dock of their tail, okay? We don't look at the actual croup the top of their croup for fat deposit. We're going to look actually behind it at the back of their tail. So we touch all these places on the horse's body and we try to see if there's actual fat there, okay? Horses are very efficient at using their energy, which is wonderful. They use the energy that they need. They store the energy that they don't need. Wild horses, obviously, are living off of grasses, right, year round. They're not getting fed a whole bunch of extra feed, so they're going to use and store as they need it, okay? We tend to get in the way of that process a little bit, either one direction or the other. The horses have access to feed. When they're domesticated, they have access to feed as we give it to them, right? And they have access to the feed that we give them, okay? So they're going to use the energy that they need for their day, and they're going to store what they don't need as fat, which is how we can look at this body condition scoring sheet and decide whether or not our horse is where we want him to be. And who wants to take a guess at where we usually want our hunter, jumper, performance horses to be? What numbers do you think? Don't be shy. What's that?
5 to a 6.
Yeah, we usually like to see them at a 5 to a 6. If we have a racehorse who is actively in training at the track, we might see him at a 4. Okay, he's going to store his energy a little bit differently because he uses it a little bit differently, right? We may see him at a 4, 4.5, but our performance horses and the riding horses that we're used to seeing are usually between a 5 and a 6, okay? Sometimes they get a little above a 6. When we start getting into the 7s, and definitely in the 8s and the 9s, what kind of things do you think we start seeing happen? Anybody have any easy keepers that you have to be careful about? What's that? Anything? I didn't hear. Any guesses? No? Well, they start having some issues with the way their bodies work, right? So they start, when they get too heavy, when they store too much energy, when they store too much fat, all that storage of fat and then the use of that fat for energy, because it's there, starts to actually cause some chemical processes to happen in their body that can cause issues like laminitis, which is our biggest concern with those horses. But also they can have gastrointestinal issues and a lot of other problems. So we want to be careful that we don't let them store too much energy, right? But we're also going to have issues if they get below those body condition scoring in those numbers. So when we get below a 4, we start thinking that the horse is not getting enough energy. He's using more than he has, and so he starts to break down other parts of his body, okay? We want our horses to use carbohydrates and fats for energy. We don't want them to necessarily use protein for energy. We want them to use their protein to rebuild their muscles, to be utilized in all the body systems, the blood vessels, the blood cells and things like that, enzymes that the proteins are used for. We don't necessarily want those proteins to be used for energy. That shouldn't be their main energy source. So we want to see that their body condition also looks good in their musculature. So we look at these areas where they store fat, and we give them a number, and then we also step back and we say, okay, from a muscle perspective, is there any area where it looks like you aren't getting what you need protein-wise? Is your body breaking down your muscles someplace? We see that a lot of times in what people call the top line, okay? And the top line is a big area of sort of controversy in nutrition. The top line is the muscle that we call longissimus dorsi, which runs from the horse's poll all the way down to his tail on either side of his spine, okay? And creates that nice rounded look that we all want in our active performance horses, okay? It's the biggest muscle in the horse's body, obviously, when you think about that size. And it needs a lot to stay healthy. It needs exercise, but it also needs protein to rebuild itself because it's working all the time. It's working when the horse is eating grass, right? It's stretching when the horse is eating grass. It's pulling its head up when it hears something that scares him. It's allowing him to gallop to get away from that thing that might eat him, even when he's just in the pasture. So that's an area that people tend to look at very carefully. We don't have that, however, on the body condition scoring chart. If you look carefully at that chart, the top line, longissimus dorsi, isn't circled there. That's not one of the places that the horse stores fat, okay? But that is one of the places that the horse who is not getting enough feed is going to go for energy, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? So that big giant muscle, okay, made up of all sorts of protein, if the horse has used up all of his carbohydrates and all of his fats that he has stored, or most of his fats that he's stored, he's gonna go to that muscle and say, oh, I need a little bit more. Can I have some from you? and you'll start to see a change in that. So that's where that kind of comes in. I always point that out when I talk about body condition scoring because it's a little bit different. It's not on the chart, still something that we look at, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with how many calories the horse is getting every day. Does that make sense to everybody? So when we ask the question, how much does my horse need to eat, or is he getting enough, we look at that body condition scoring chart. So if my horse is a 4, and I want him to be a 5 or a 6, I need to feed him a diet that has an excess of energy, what we call a positive energy balance. I need to feed him more calories, right? So that he has more than he needs every day, and he starts storing some more, and starts putting some more fat in those areas so that we can go up a body condition score. If I want him to lose weight because he's an 8, like my mini is right now, oops, I need to feed him a little bit less, right? So if I want to get him to lose a little bit of weight, I'm going to feed him less calories than he needs every day, so that he's going to use some of those fat storages and go down a body condition score. So it's a balance, just like it is for all of us, okay? Horses are the opposite of us, where they take a very long time to put weight on, but take it off very quickly. Fun fact. I wish that was the way it was for me, but it's not. So we have to be aware of where our horse is on that body condition scoring chart pretty much all of the time, okay? Here at Lake Erie College, we have our horses professionally body condition scored by our feed representative once a semester, so that we can talk about feed changes that they might need, but we do it even more often than that, okay? We go through the barn and we look at the horses. The students are responsible for a couple of horses in the barn all semester long when they take the nutrition class for body condition scoring them. Practicum students are responsible for their horses for body condition scoring. We start this right away with the freshmen, and you continue to do it with the horses in the barn all the way through your senior year, so you get very good and practice at it. It can change very quickly, okay? Was my point in saying that they lose weight fast, right? And it takes them a while to put it back on. So we can't just say, okay, my horse came in the fall at a 5, he's gonna go back to work for a little while and he'll be fine with what he's eating. Things may change, okay? Also, what they're eating changes, regardless of how hard we try for that not to be the case. So that kind of moves me to my second conversation. What do we feed the horses? And horse people, as I'm sure you all know, we're all very opinionated, right? We know what we want. So you'll meet many people who say, my feed company is the best feed company. It will make all of your horses in the barn look 100 times better than they do right now. You just need to go to Tractor Supply and get what I'm buying, because I really like it. Sometimes that's true, but for the most part, we have to look at each horse on an individual basis, right? Every horse needs to be body condition scored, and then we need to look at what that particular horse needs. And the diet really needs to start someplace other than Tractor Supply, okay? It starts with the forage that the horse is eating. So it starts with pasture grass and hay, right? Horses are not originally evolved to eat cereal grains. We do that, we add that to their diet. We add that to their diet so that they are able to have the extra calories that they need to do the work that we ask for them to do, and that we've bred for them to need, right? The thoroughbred racehorse needs more calories, right, than the Haflinger does. We know the difference, okay? But we have to add what they need to their diet for what we're asking them to do. So we have to start, however, with what is most natural to them, which is their forage. So my lovely teaching assistants are gonna walk around while I talk about hay a little bit. It would be wonderful if all of the horses in northeastern Ohio could eat pasture grass all year round. If the sun shone and they could go outside and eat pasture grass all year round. But that is very much not true in much of the country, right? Here in Ohio, we have cool season perennial grasses that have a growing season that goes from about, if we're being generous, March to October. Really, the true growing season starts in April and ends pretty much right about now, right? So what we do is we have to store it somehow, which means we go out and we cut it in the summertime, we dry it in the sun, and we put it in our barns, and we call it hay, and we give it to them all year round. So the girls are walking around with a couple of options of what hay may look like. And you can go slowly, you can stop at the tables and show them. They have a first cutting, a second cutting, and a dried alfalfa cube, okay? 3 different options for forage that we have to feed our horses. Hay quality is a really important thing when we're going back to that question of what do we feed our horses, okay? The quality of the hay has to do with the type of grass that it's made of and the time at which it was cut, okay? The time in its growth at which it was cut. So knowing that, we have to kind of, as we're making this the basis of our diet for our horses, we have to understand the differences. We have a first cut and a second cutting hay that we feed here, and that's what they're going around with. It's grass hay, right? It's a mixed grass hay. Timothy, orchard grass, full season perennials that are native to this area. And the hay that we have is a pretty good quality, okay? If it is cut, usually our haying season begins, if we're lucky, in June and ends in September in Ohio, okay? What we want our hay to be is a mid-growth of the grasses to the point that it's almost ready to do its seeding, right? It's growing, it's spent all this time getting a little bit tall. That means that gives us a lot of bulk to feed our horses. We don't want to just cut it like we cut our grass on our lawn, right? Because we won't have anything to give them at the end of all of that. We want it to be bulky so that we have plenty of weight to feed them. And we want it to be right about at the time when that hay is, when that grass is getting ready to kind of go to seed, because that means we have the most nutrition that we can get with the amount, with the bulk of hay. And that's for our first cutting. Unfortunately, in order to successfully have a hay harvest, we need 4 full, dry, sunny days. And here in Ohio, sometimes that doesn't happen until the second week of July, right? And sometimes the hay gets a little older than we want it to. If the hay is given a little more time to mature, it's higher in fiber, it's going to be a little lower in calories, okay? Still, the horses can eat it. It's not going to hurt them to eat it. But if I have that horse that's at a 4 and I'm trying to get him up to a 6, right? He's going to have to eat a whole heck of a lot more of that older hay than he would if we were to give him something that was a little higher in calorie. Enter the second cutting hay. So after the first cut has happened, right, in hopefully June, maybe July, the farmer allows the hay to grow again. It allows it to kind of regenerate. The hay's like, oh shoot, I didn't get to seed, bummer, I need to start over again. And it puts its nutrients back in and it starts growing. It's a little bit of a different growing cycle in the middle of the summer, obviously, than it is in the beginning, but it tries again. It tries to get back to that reproductive level. And it grows a little bit more. And we're able to get another harvest, right? The second harvest of hay is usually a little bit higher in nutrient content, a little bit higher in calories, because it's younger when we cut it, okay? It's not able to get back to that point that it was when we cut it for the first cutting. So it's a little bit younger when we cut it. So it's usually, it tastes a little bit better, right? The horses like it. And it's usually a little higher in calorie and a little higher in nutrient content. So we have that sort of start with what we've got to feed them as hay. Now, we also were walking around with some hay cubes. Those you can buy at the feed store or at Tractor Supply. Those are dried, prepared forage cubes. So those have been mechanically dried past the point that our regular hay would have been in order to store them for longer. You usually want to soak those before you feed them because they can be really dry, the horses can choke on them. But that is also a way that you are able to give them a little bit more. If you have a lower quality forage, you can give them a little bit more nutritional content from a forage standpoint. So I just kind of wanted you to see all the different options that you had. So you notice in the first cutting hay, it's a little thicker, it's a little longer. I hate to start with color, because color is not always the best indicator of quality of hay. But the second cutting hay is almost always a little more green, right? It still has a little bit more color. As our grasses start to go to that older, more mature height, okay, they lose a little bit of their color. So our first cutting hay is usually a little lighter, a little more yellow, and the second cutting hay is going to be a little more green. But hay quality itself really has to do with what's actually in that grass. The only way to really know for sure is to have your hay tested. Okay, you can actually send samples of your hay to have it get a nutritional, basically nutrition text for your hay back to you, which will tell you how many calories are in your hay, tell you how much protein is in your hay. If you can do that, it's great, right? However, that changes throughout the year. The hay tends to lose a little bit of its nutritional value as we store it. Does anybody know how long hay can be stored before we're really sure that it's lost most of its, at least, vitamin content? Anybody want to take a guess on how long you can store it? About a year. Yeah, about a year. Usually for horses, we store the hay for about a year, and then after a year, you can still feed it. But again, you're probably going to start to see that the vitamins that were there have sort of destabilized and are not available to them anymore. The palatability goes down, it's not as tasty, it gets sort of dusty after sitting for a while. So usually we want to store what we need for about a year, okay? We start our ration with our forage, and that's the most important thing to understand about horse nutrition across the board. That's what they're supposed to eat. That's what they're made to eat. We need to start with that, and then add the concentrates, which is our grains and the things that we can buy commercially as we go. If you have a higher quality hay, you may need to feed less grain to maintain that body condition score that you want. If you have a lower quality hay, you may need to feed more grain or a different type of grain to be able to maintain that body condition score that you want. But the idea is, at the end of the day, we all come back to that body condition score. Does my horse, is he getting what he needs, okay, and from calories to start with? Now, obviously, there's a whole nother semester of things for us to talk about that goes into vitamins and minerals and some of the other things that the horses need to have. It's not just about calories. But we start there because that's the thing that we can control most obviously and that we can see most particularly in the body condition scoring chart. Okay? What questions do you have?